I should have known something was wrong when my coffee mug started shaking in my hands. Not from fear, hell no, but from the sheer absurdity of what I was hearing through the kitchen doorway. When will you tell my son none of the kids are his? My mother's voice, sharp as broken glass, cut through the morning air like a scalpel through flesh. My wife Celia's response made my blood freeze. Not until the tuition and weddings are paid for. Their real father can't afford any of it. I stood there in the hallway of my own goddamn house, holding a mug that read, "World's Greatest Dad." The irony's so thick you could choke on it. 23 years of marriage, 3 kids, and apparently I'd been playing house with someone else's family this entire time. Besides, Celia continued, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper she used when gossiping about the neighbors. Tom's too stupid to figure it out. Look at him. He actually believes Katie has his eyes. My mother chuckled. That girl has Derek's eyes, no question. And Michael definitely has his father's stubborn streak. Derek fucking Morrison, my wife's so-called business associate. The same Derek who'd been coming to our barbecues for 15 years, slapping my back and calling me buddy, while apparently having slapped something else entirely. I set the mug down on the hallway table with surgical precision. No dramatic crashes, no theatrical gasps, just a man processing the systematic destruction of his entire existence while his mother and wife discussed it like they were planning a grocery list. "What about little Emma?" Mom asked. "Oh, she's definitely Derek's. Same dimples, same laugh." Tom never noticed because he was always working those double shifts at the plant. Right, those double shifts I'd worked to pay for Emma's violin lessons, Katie's college applications, and Michael's football equipment. All for kids who shared DNA with Derek Morrison instead of me. I backed away from the kitchen, my work boots silent on the hardwood floor I'd installed myself 3 summers ago. The same floor where my fake family had taken countless Christmas morning photos, birthday celebrations, and homework sessions. In my bedroom, our bedroom, I grabbed my phone and did what any rational man would do. I called in sick to the automotive plant, then sat on the edge of the bed, staring at family photos scattered across the dresser. Katie, 19, supposedly had my eyes. Bullshit. Those were Derek's green eyes, not my brown ones. Michael, 17, who I'd taught to throw a perfect spiral. His jawline looked nothing like mine, but it sure as hell matched Derek's square-cut features. And Emma, my baby at 14, with those dimples that had melted my heart for years. None of them were mine. I heard Celia's heels clicking up the stairs. Showtime. "Tom? I thought you left for work already." She appeared in the doorway, perfectly put together as always. Blonde hair and a neat bob, business suit pressed and professional. The successful insurance agent who'd climbed the corporate ladder while I'd apparently been climbing a ladder to nowhere. "Felt sick," I said, not looking up from the photos. "Stomach bug or something." She moved closer, and I caught a whiff of her perfume. The same perfume she'd worn on our wedding day. Now just another lie in a catalog of deceptions. Poor baby. Want me to make you some soup before I head to the office? Poor baby. Jesus Christ. Nah, I'll be fine. You go ahead and have your meeting with Derek today. I watched her face in the mirror across the room. Just a tiny flinch, barely perceptible. But I'd been married to this woman for over 2 decades. I knew her tells. How did you know about that meeting? Lucky guess. After she left, I spent the morning doing what any good detective would do. I investigated my own life. 23 years of marriage leaves a lot of evidence lying around, and I'd been too trusting to notice the patterns. Credit card statements showed regular hotel charges on days when Derek was supposedly out of town on business. Celia's phone bills revealed hundreds of texts and calls to his number, often late at night when she claimed to be working on client files. But the real smoking gun was in her jewelry box, hidden behind a false bottom I'd never known existed. Letters, dozens of them, dating back over 20 years. Love letters from Derek, talking about our children and when we can finally be together. The earliest letter was dated 6 months before Katie was born. I sat there reading about my wife's affair, about how they'd planned to leave their respective spouses, but decided it was more convenient to let me raise and pay for their kids while they continued their relationship on the side. One letter made me laugh out loud, actually laugh at the sheer audacity. Tom's such a good provider, the kids adore him, and he never questions anything. We're so lucky he's willing to work those extra shifts to give our family everything we need. Our family, their family, my wallet. By noon, I'd made my decision. I called my buddy Jake, who worked in construction, and asked him to come over with his truck. Then I called a locksmith. "What's the job?" Jake asked when he arrived. "Moving day," I said. "Everything in this house that belongs to my wife and kids needs to be on the front lawn by 3 o'clock." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Divorce?" "Something like that." We worked fast. Clothes, personal items, photos, everything that belonged to Celia and the kids went into garbage bags and boxes. I kept a few things: my tools, my books, my records. Everything else was fair game for the front yard sale. The locksmith arrived at 2:30. By 3 o'clock, every lock in the house had been changed. At 3:15, I taped a note to the front door. "Celia, Katie, Michael, and Emma. Congratulations on finally being free to live with your real father. I've packed your belongings and placed them on the lawn. Don't bother trying the locks. They've been changed. Derek's address is 1247 Maple Street, in case you forgot. Best of luck with your real family. Tom. P.S. I'm keeping the dog. Rex is the only one in this house who's actually loyal." At 4 o'clock, I was sitting on my front porch with a beer and Rex at my feet when Celia's BMW pulled into the driveway. Derek's silver Mercedes was right behind her. The look on her face was priceless. Shock, then anger, then panic, as she saw her entire life scattered across the front lawn. Neighbors had already started gathering, phones out, recording what was clearly going to be the neighborhood's entertainment for the evening. "Tom, what the hell is this?" she screamed, marching up to the porch. "Spring cleaning," I said, taking another sip of beer. Figured it was time to get rid of some dead weight. Derek stepped up beside her, all 6'2" of his entitled swagger. "Now hold on, buddy. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Buddy?" I stood up, Rex growling low beside me. "The only misunderstanding is how long it took me to figure out you've been fucking my wife and passing your kids off as mine." The color drained from both their faces. Around us, I could hear phones clicking as neighbors captured every word. "Tom, let's talk about this inside," Celia said, her voice shaking. "Can't. You don't live here anymore. None of you do." Derek tried to step onto my porch. "Big mistake. I've been working in an automotive plant for 15 years. My hands are strong from handling heavy machinery. My reflexes sharp from avoiding industrial accidents." When Derek reached for my arm, I caught his wrist and twisted it just enough to make him stumble backward. "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't make this worse than it already is." He looked like he wanted to try again, but the growing crowd of neighbors with their cameras made him think twice. Nothing kills a tough guy's confidence like the prospect of getting his ass kicked on social media. "This isn't over," he said, straightening his jacket. "You're right," I replied. "It's just getting started." The next morning, I woke up in my own house for the first time in 23 years. No Celia hogging the bathroom, no kids arguing over breakfast, no fake family drama to navigate, just me, Rex, and the sweet sound of silence. But silence doesn't pay the bills or plan revenge. I had work to do. First stop, my mother's house. Time for a conversation that was 23 years overdue. Mom lived in the same ranch-style house where I'd grown up, about 10 minutes across town. She was in her garden when I pulled up, tending to her roses like she didn't have a care in the world. "Tommy," she said without looking up, "I heard about yesterday's excitement." "I bet you did. Small town, big mouths." She finally turned to face me, and I saw something I'd never noticed before. Guilt. It was written all over her weathered face. "We need to talk, Mom." Inside her kitchen, surrounded by the same floral wallpaper from my childhood, I laid out everything I knew. The overheard conversation, the letters, the timeline that made it clear none of my kids were actually mine. "How long have you known?" I asked. She poured herself coffee with shaking hands. "Since Katie was born. One look at that baby, and I knew she wasn't yours. But Celia begged me not to say anything. Said it would destroy the family." "What family?" "The fake one where I worked my ass off to support another man's children? Those children love you, Tommy. You're the only father they've ever known. Built on a lie, Mom. Everything was built on a goddamn lie, and you helped." She started crying then, but I was fresh out of sympathy. 23 years of deception doesn't get washed away with a few tears. I thought it was better this way. Derek was married too, and his wife couldn't have children. It seemed like everyone got what they wanted, everyone except me. I left her there with her coffee and her guilt. I had bigger fish to fry. Next stop, the law office of Jim Bradley, my old high school buddy who'd become the town's most successful attorney. If I was going to destroy my fake family, I needed to do it legally and thoroughly. Jesus, Tom, Jim said after I'd explained the situation. This is like something out of a soap opera. Can I sue them? For what? Adultery isn't illegal, and you voluntarily supported those kids for years. Fraud. Intentional misrepresentation. I've got 23 years of receipts for child support I shouldn't have been paying. Jim leaned back in his leather chair thinking. It's a long shot, but we might be able to make a case for fraudulent inducement. If you can prove Celia intentionally deceived you about the paternity to secure financial support, I can prove it. I've got love letters going back 20 years. That changes things. We'll need DNA evidence to make it stick, though. Already working on that. I wasn't lying. That afternoon, I drove to the high school where Katie was finishing her senior year. I waited in the parking lot until classes ended, then approached her as she walked to her car. Dad? She looked confused and hurt. Mom said you kicked us out. Why would you do that? Looking at her, I felt a stab of something that might have been grief. This girl had called me Dad for 19 years. I'd taught her to ride a bike, helped with homework, walked her to her first day of school. None of that was fake, even if the biology was. Katie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Have you ever wondered why you look so different from me? Her face went pale. What are you talking about? Your eyes, your hair, your facial structure. Look at me, really look. Do you see any resemblance? She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched the realization dawn in those green eyes. Derek's green eyes. You know, don't you? She whispered. I know. The question is, did you know? She started crying then, big ugly sobs that shook her whole body. I suspected. We all did. But Mom said. She said it didn't matter, that you were our dad in every way that counted. It matters to me, Katie. It matters that I've been living a lie for over 20 years. So what happens now? You just stop being our father? I was never your father. That's the point. I left her there in the parking lot, crying beside her car. The car I'd helped her buy with money from those extra shifts at the plant. The DNA test was easier than I'd expected. Katie's hairbrush from the bathroom had plenty of samples, and Michael had left a water bottle in his room. Emma's DNA came from a retainer case she'd forgotten in the rush to pack. Marius. I drove to the next town over and paid cash at a private lab. Results in 72 hours, no questions asked. While I waited, I focused on phase 2 of my investigation, Derek Morrison's life. If I was going to destroy him, I needed to know his weaknesses. Marius. Derek lived in Brookfield Estates, the fancy subdivision where all the town's successful professionals had their McMansions. His house was a colonial-style monument to suburban success, complete with a circular driveway and professionally landscaped yard. I parked across the street Tuesday evening and watched the domestic scene unfold through his living room windows. Derek, Celia, and my former kids, playing happy family in their new environment. Derek's wife was nowhere to be seen, probably knew about the affair and decided to cut her losses. Wednesday night, I got bolder. I walked around the property, noting security cameras, entry points, and the garage code Derek punched in when he came home from work. Amazing how careless people get when they think they're safe. Thursday night brought the DNA results, delivered to a P.O. box I'd rented under a fake name. 3 separate tests, 3 identical conclusions. I was not the biological father of Katie, Michael, or Emma Morrison. Yes, Morrison. That's how I'd started thinking of them. I sat in my truck outside the lab, reading the official documents that confirmed what I already knew. 23 years of my life, reduced to genetic markers and probability percentages. But numbers don't lie, unlike people. Friday morning, I made copies of everything. The DNA results, the love letters, the financial records showing how much I'd spent on Derek's children over the years. Then I drove to the nicest print shop in town and had it all bound into a professional presentation folder. 3 folders, actually. One for Celia, one for Derek, and one for my lawyer. The confrontation was set for Friday evening. I knew Derek and Celia would be at the Riverside Grill, their usual date night spot. They'd been going there every Friday for years, back when I thought she was having dinner with her girlfriends. I arrived at 6:30 and requested a table with a clear view of their booth. They were already there, holding hands across the table like teenagers in love. It would have been romantic if it wasn't so fucking disgusting. I waited until they'd ordered dessert, then walked over to their table. Mind if I join you? Celia's face went white. Derek started to stand up, but I placed a hand on his shoulder and pushed him back down. Sit. We're going to have a civilized conversation. I pulled up a chair and placed the presentation folder on the table between them. "What's this?" Derek asked. "Your children's DNA test results. Congratulations, Dad. All three are definitely yours." Celia grabbed the folder and opened it, her hands shaking as she flipped through the pages. Other diners were starting to notice the drama unfolding in their quiet restaurant. "Tom, please," she whispered. "Not here." "Why not here? You two have been conducting your relationship in public for 20 years. Seems appropriate." Derek tried to take charge of the situation. "Look, Tom, I know this is difficult, but we can work something out. We're all adults here." "Adults?" I laughed, loud enough to make the couple at the next table turn around. "Adults don't spend 20 years lying to someone's face while fucking behind their back." "Keep your voice down," Derek hissed. "Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead. I'd love to explain to Officer Martinez how you've been committing fraud for 2 decades. That's when Derek made his second big mistake of the week. He grabbed my wrist, trying to intimidate me into leaving. "I've mentioned that I work with heavy machinery, right? My grip strength could crush walnuts." Derek's soft office worker hands were no match for 20 years of manual labor. I grabbed his wrist in return and squeezed until he winced. "Don't ever touch me again," I said quietly. "In fact, don't ever speak to me again. You want to play house with Celia and your kids? Fine. But you're going to pay for the privilege." I released his wrist and stood up, leaving the DNA folder on their table. "Enjoy your dessert. And Derek, you might want to start looking for a second job. Those kids are expensive." The weekend gave me time to plan phase 3 of my revenge: public humiliation. In a small town like ours, reputation is everything. Destroy someone's reputation, and you've destroyed their life. Monday morning, I started with Celia's workplace. Midwest Insurance Group prided itself on family values and community trust. Their slogan was literally, "Integrity you can count on." Perfect. I'd prepared a different kind of presentation folder for Celia's boss, Regional Manager Patricia Walsh. This one contained copies of the love letters, the DNA results, and a timeline showing how Celia's affair had overlapped with several major client acquisitions. "Mr. Henderson," Patricia said when I arrived at her office, "what can I do for you? I thought you should know that one of your senior agents has been conducting a 20-year affair that involved defrauding her husband out of hundreds of thousands of dollars." I placed the folder on her desk and watched her face change as she read through the evidence. "This is quite serious," she said finally. "It gets better. Check the timeline on page 6. Notice how Celia's biggest sales coincided with her lover's business connections? Derek Morrison has been feeding her inside information from his company for years. That wasn't entirely true, but it didn't need to be. The suggestion was enough to plant seeds of doubt about every deal Celia had ever closed. "What do you want me to do about this?" Patricia asked. "That's up to you. But if I were running a company based on integrity, I'd want to know if one of my employees was a pathological liar." I left the folder with Patricia and drove across town to Derek's workplace, Morrison Construction Management. Derek was a project supervisor for the county's biggest construction firm, responsible for bidding on municipal contracts worth millions of dollars. His boss, Frank Morrison, no relation, just an unfortunate coincidence, was less diplomatic than Patricia. "You're telling me Derek's been lying about his personal life for 20 years? Frank asked. "I'm telling you Derek's been lying, period. If he'll lie to his wife and his best friend, what makes you think he's honest with you?" I left a folder there too, along with a suggestion that Frank might want to audit Derek's recent project bids. Tuesday brought phase 4, social destruction. I'd created a simple website using one of those free hosting services. The domain name was truthaboutderekandcelia.com, and it contained every piece of evidence I'd gathered, laid out in chronological order like a prosecutor's case file. Then I sent the link to everyone in my contact list, along with a brief message. "After 23 years of marriage, I discovered my wife has been having an affair and that none of my children are biologically mine. I thought our friends and neighbors should know the truth about the people they've been trusting with their secrets, their business, and their friendship." The response was immediate and brutal. My phone started ringing within an hour, friends and neighbors calling to express shock, outrage, and support. By evening, the website had been shared across every social media platform in town. Derek's construction company started getting calls from clients questioning his integrity. Celia's insurance office was flooded with policy cancellation requests. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a front-page article titled, "DNA Tests Reveal 20-Year Deception." Wednesday morning brought the first real confrontation since the restaurant incident. Derek showed up at my house at 6 a.m., pounding on the front door like he was trying to break it down. I answered the door in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, Rex growling beside me. "You son of a bitch," Derek snarled. "You've destroyed everything." "I didn't destroy anything. I just told the truth. If the truth destroyed your life, that's on you. Take down that website. Stop spreading lies about us." "What lies? Every document on that site is authentic. Every timeline is accurate. Every conclusion is based on evidence." Derek pushed past me into my living room, and I let him. Sometimes you have to let your enemy make the first move. "I'm warning you, Tom. Stop this harassment, or I'll call the police." "Go ahead. I'd love to explain to them how you've been defrauding me for 20 years. That's when Derek made his third and biggest mistake. He grabbed me by the collar and shoved me against the wall. I've been in exactly 3 fights in my adult life, and I won all 3 of them. Not because I'm particularly tough, but because I'm smart enough to wait for my opponent to make a mistake. Derek's mistake was thinking that because he was taller and younger, he could intimidate me physically. What he didn't account for was 20 years of pent-up rage and 15 years of manual labor conditioning. I grabbed his wrists, twisted them behind his back, and walked him face first into my front door. Then I opened the door and shoved him onto the porch, where Mrs. Patterson from next door was walking her dog. "Morning, Mrs. Patterson," I called out cheerfully. Derek was just leaving. Derek stumbled down the porch steps, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You keep saying that, but from where I'm standing, it looks pretty over to me." Mrs. Patterson watched the whole thing with wide eyes, her phone already out and recording. By noon, the video of Derek getting tossed from my house was circulating on Facebook with the caption, "Homewrecker gets what he deserves." Thursday brought news that Celia had been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into her business practices. Derek's construction company had suspended him without pay, while they audited his project records. But the real victory came Friday afternoon, when my lawyer called with an update on the civil suit. "Tom, you're not going to believe this. Derek's lawyer called wanting to settle out of court." "How much?" "They're offering $200,000 to make this go away quietly." I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Counter offer, $400,000. Plus they both leave town within 60 days. That's pretty aggressive. So was lying to me for 20 years. Jim called back an hour later. They accepted. Just like that, I'd won. $400,000 in damages, plus the satisfaction of watching my fake family pack up and disappear from my life forever. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more person who needed to pay for their role in this deception. Saturday morning, I drove to my mother's house for our final conversation. She was waiting for me on the front porch, looking older than I'd ever seen her. "I heard about the settlement," she said. "Did you? News travels fast in a small town." "Tommy, I know you're angry with me, but I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me? Mom, you helped them steal 23 years of my life. Those children needed a father. They had a father. Derek, you just thought I was a better paycheck." She started crying again, but I was still fresh out of sympathy. "I'm moving to Florida next month," I told her. "Bought a place on the Gulf Coast with some of the settlement money. I won't be coming back for visits, and I won't be taking your calls." "You can't mean that." "I mean every word. You made your choice 20 years ago. Now I'm making mine." I left her there on the porch, crying into her hands. Some bridges are meant to be burned. Moving day arrived exactly 60 days later, just as the settlement agreement specified. I stood on my front porch, coffee mug in hand, watching Derek load boxes into a moving truck while Celia supervised from the sidewalk. The kids, Derek's kids, looked miserable. Katie kept glancing toward my house like she wanted to say goodbye, but I'd made it clear that chapter of my life was closed. Michael just looked angry, probably blaming me for disrupting his senior year. Emma seemed confused more than anything else, too young to fully understand the adult drama that had destroyed her world. Part of me felt bad for them. They hadn't asked to be born into a web of lies and deception. But feeling bad doesn't change biology, and biology doesn't lie like people do. Derek caught me watching and had the balls to wave, like we were neighbors saying a friendly goodbye instead of enemies ending a 20-year war. I didn't wave back. Celia looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past 2 months. The stress of losing her job, her reputation, and her comfortable life had taken its toll. Her perfectly styled hair was showing gray roots, and her designer clothes had been replaced with discount store basics. Good. She'd earned every sleepless night and every whispered comment from former friends. The moving truck pulled away at noon, followed by Derek's Mercedes and Celia's BMW. I watched until they disappeared around the corner, then went inside to finish my own packing. My Florida house was a modest place on the water, nothing fancy but comfortable enough for a man and his dog. I'd bought it sight unseen, based on photos and a virtual tour. Sometimes you have to trust that anywhere is better than where you are. Rex seemed excited about the move, probably sensing my improved mood. Dogs are smart that way. They know when their humans are finally free. The drive south took 2 days, with an overnight stop in Georgia. I'd never been much of a traveler, but something about putting miles between myself and the past felt therapeutic. Every state line was another layer of distance from the lies and betrayal. My new house was perfect, small but clean, with a screened porch overlooking a canal that led to the Gulf of Mexico. The previous owner had left a fishing boat tied to the dock, and the real estate agent said it was included in the sale. I'd never been much of a fisherman, but I figured I had time to learn. The first week was spent getting settled, buying furniture, and exploring my new town. It was bigger than the place I'd left behind, but still small enough that the hardware store clerk remembered my name after 2 visits. Nobody here knew my story. Nobody looked at me with pity or curiosity or judgment. I was just Tom Henderson, the guy who'd moved down from up north, bought the old Garrett place, and minded his own business. It was exactly what I needed. 3 months into my new life, I was sitting on the dock with Rex, trying to figure out how to cast a fishing line without hooking myself, when my phone rang. Unknown number, but with a familiar area code. Tom, it's Katie. I almost hung up, but something in her voice stopped me. What do you want, Katie? I wanted to apologize, and to tell you something important. I'm listening. Derek left, just packed up one day and disappeared, left Mom with all the bills and no way to pay them. She's working at a grocery store now, barely making ends meet. I felt a brief moment of satisfaction, followed immediately by guilt for feeling satisfied. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Really? The question caught me off guard. Was I sorry? These people had destroyed my life, stolen 23 years from me, and turned me into a fool. Did I really feel bad that their lies had finally caught up with them? I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of something that wasn't your fault, I said finally. But I'm not sorry that actions have consequences. I understand. I wanted you to know that I loved you. We all did. You were a good father, even if you weren't our biological father. Katie, I know you can't forgive us. I know too much has happened. But I needed you to know that the love was real, even if everything else was a lie. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me sitting on the dock with a phone in one hand and a fishing rod in the other, trying to process emotions I'd thought I'd buried. Rex looked at me with those knowing dog eyes, and I scratched behind his ears. What do you think, boy? Think I'm a bad person for not caring what happens to them? Rex just wagged his tail. Dogs don't judge. They just love unconditionally and stay loyal no matter what. Maybe that's why I'd always preferred animals to people. The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere up north, my former family was dealing with the consequences of 20 years of deception. Derek had abandoned them just like he'd abandoned his integrity, leaving Celia to face the wreckage alone. I should have felt vindicated. Justice served, accounts settled, wrongs righted. Instead, I just felt tired, but tired was better than betrayed. Tired was better than living a lie. Tired was the price of freedom, and I'd paid much worse prices for much less valuable things. I cast my line into the water and waited for something to bite. The fish down here were different from the ones up north, but the principle was the same. Patience, persistence, and the right bait would eventually get you what you wanted. It had worked for my revenge. Maybe it would work for my peace of mind too. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same spot when my phone rang again. This time it was my lawyer. Tom, I thought you should know. Derek Morrison was arrested yesterday for embezzling funds from his new employer. Where was he working? Construction company in Atlanta. Apparently he's been skimming money from project budgets for months. They're saying it could be over $100,000. I wasn't surprised. A man who'll lie to his family for 20 years will lie to anyone about anything. Derek's moral compass had been broken long before I'd exposed his secrets. What's this got to do with me? Nothing legally. but the prosecutor in his case called asking about our civil suit. Seems they want to establish a pattern of fraudulent behavior. Are you going to cooperate? That's up to you. They're not requiring it, just requesting it. I thought about it for a moment. Derek was already facing prison time. My testimony might add a few years to his sentence, but it wouldn't change the outcome significantly. Tell them I'm not interested. I got my justice already. You sure? I'm sure. After Jim hung up, I sat there thinking about justice, revenge, and the difference between the two. Justice is supposed to be impartial, balanced, fair. Revenge is personal, emotional, satisfying in a way that justice never can be. I'd gotten both, but revenge had been more satisfying. Derek would spend the next few years in prison, learning what happens when you steal from the wrong people. Celia would continue working minimum wage jobs, struggling to pay bills that Derek's income used to cover. The kids would grow up understanding that actions have consequences, and that trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. As for me, I was sitting on a dock in Florida, fishing in waters where nobody knew my story and nobody cared about my past. Rex was sleeping in the shade beside me, and my bank account was $400,000 heavier than it had been a year ago. I'd lost a family that was never really mine, but I'd gained something more valuable, the truth. And the truth, as painful as it was, had set me free. A fish tugged on my line, and I started reeling it in. A nice-sized red snapper, perfect for dinner. I'd learned to clean and cook fish over the past few months, one of many skills I'd developed in my new life. The old Tom Henderson had been content to work double shifts and trust other people to be honest. The new Tom Henderson trusted nobody but himself and Rex, and he was perfectly fine with that arrangement. Some people might call it bitter. I called it realistic. The sun was setting again, and the water was calm. Tomorrow I'd wake up in a house that was truly mine, with a dog who was genuinely loyal, in a town where nobody was lying to me about anything important. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I'd earned, and that was enough.